Yeah, shockwaves, anger, disappointment, and real concern among Republicans in this building.
We have major breaking news with massive implications for the upcoming midterms, control of the United States Senate, and ultimately the final 2 years of the Trump administration. As we speak, both hardcore MAGA Republicans and the Democratic Party are collectively cheering, and Republican politicians are collectively panicking because Donald Trump has finally officially formally endorsed the wildly controversial and corrupt Ken Paxton over incumbent Republican Senator John Cornyn in the Texas Republican primary. In other words, Donald Trump has effectively put the red state of Texas into play for the Democratic Party. The Democrats may finally win control of Texas because of Trump's new nominee that the MAGA base loves, but most others don't. And we have to talk about this. But before we do, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, folks, this is risky but good news. As Mediaite reports, breaking, Trump endorses Ken Paxton in Texas GOP primary. Donald Trump has endorsed Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton's primary campaign against Senator John Cornyn in a bombshell announcement on Tuesday. Quote, "The highly respected Attorney General of Texas, Ken Paxton, an amazing America First patriot and someone who's always been extremely loyal to me and our amazing MAGA movement, is running for the United States Senate to represent a place I love and won big 3 times with 6.4 million votes in 2024, the most votes in the history of the state by far. I know Ken well, and we have seen him tested at the highest and most difficult levels, and he is a winner. Ken is a strong supporter of terminating the filibuster and, very importantly, the Save America Act, was something that polls at 87%, including Democrats, and yet can't seem to get approved. Perhaps Ken can help move these important elements of government forward because with the filibuster, as an example, the Democrats will terminate it on their first day in office, giving us 2 extra states, D.C. and Puerto Rico, and a greatly enlarged Supreme Court of the United States, probably going with their dream number of 21 justices from the 9 that we currently have. And these new justices will be radical left lunatics. 2 years ago, our country was dead. Now we have the hottest country anywhere in the world, and I want to keep it that way. Ken Paxton will help me do that, making America bigger, better, and stronger than ever before. Ken is a true MAGA warrior who's always delivered for Texas and will continue to do so in the United States Senate. He will tirelessly fight to continue the great growth of our economy, cut taxes and regulations. I just delivered the largest tax and regulation cuts in American history. And advance Made in the USA, unleash American energy dominance, champion Texas oil and gas, advocate for our amazing farmers and ranchers, promote school choice, keep our border secure, stop migrant crime, support incredible military and veterans, safeguard our elections, and protect our always under siege Second Amendment. John Cornyn is a good man, and I worked well with him, but he was not supportive of me when times were tough. And despite having the most successful economy in the history of our country during my first term, and with all of the many other things that I accomplished, secure border, military dominance, Space Force, all-time high stock markets and 401ks, record job and economic growth, and so many other things that would be impossible to readily list, which are considered by many to be legendary, John was very late in backing me in what turned out to be an historic run for the Republican nomination, and then the presidency itself, both of which were landslide victories, and more importantly, gave us the country that we have today, the golden age of America. And when we finish up with Iran, which will not be allowed to have nuclear weapons, you will see numbers that have never been before generated by our country before, as opposed to the disaster of the previous administration. Ken Paxton's gone through a lot, in many cases very unfairly, but he's a fighter and he knows how to win. Our country needs fighters and also loyalty to the cause of greatness. We can never allow what happened to the United States of America during the corrupt Biden administration to happen again. In Texas alone, just look at the border, with the highest level criminals allowed to run through your state, totally unvetted and unchecked, through an open order policy that was a laughingstock all over the world. I came in and fixed it immediately. I will not permit these dark and dangerous days to come back. We've already made America great again, but now we want to make our nation better than ever before. Therefore, Ken Paxton has my complete and total endorsement to be the next United States Senator from the great state of Texas. Ken Paxton will never let you down. Donald J. Trump. Cornyn has the support of his colleagues in the Senate and most of the Republican establishment, while Paxton has been long hampered by a number of significant personal and public corruption scandals. So he's corrupt, deluded, cruel. Donald Trump, right? Ken Paxton, 2 peas in a pod. Before we get to the reaction, I just want you to understand, as Fact Post notes, Trump has endorsed Ken Paxton for U.S. Senate, who was impeached by his own party for corruption. paid $300,000 to settle his felony fraud charges, had multiple extramarital affairs, contested the 2020 election, was sued for firing whistleblowers, is under investigation for mortgage fraud, stole a $1,000 pen from another lawyer. Again, Ken Paxton is, like Donald Trump, just an indictment of the Republican Party, morally inferior to any, of course, Democrat in Texas or anywhere else. It just objectively is the morally inferior party at this point, shamelessly, unapologetically corrupt, much like Donald Trump himself. So it seemed almost inevitable that he would ultimately endorse Paxton, even though many pollsters and Republican politicians and certainly Republican senators are terrified about this because it jeopardizes control of the Senate. As Laksha Jain, one of the top pollsters, co-founder of Split Ticket, one of the bigwigs at The Argument magazine, friend of the show and frequent guest, says this race was a much tougher lift for Democrats a couple of months ago when Trump's approval was at minus 14. It's at minus 21 now, and the generic ballot is D7 and climbing. Cornyn would still be favored. Paxton makes a Trump plus 14 state a pure toss-up. So as of this moment, Texas is genuinely in play. Now, Paxton still may yet win. James Tallarico, the Democratic nominee, may yet lose. Things may change, but as of this moment, Donald Trump has effectively put Texas in play. We're going to get to the Republican response in just a moment because they're panicking, and I love it. But I also want you to see how John Cornyn responded because it was weak shit. All right? Cornyn, by the way, is in the same position that Bill Cassidy and Thomas Massie are in. Thomas Massie most of all, but Bill Cassidy and John Cornyn are incumbent Republican senators, one from Louisiana, one from Texas. And they supported Trump. They grade Trump on a curve. They ran back to him. They sacrificed principle for the sake of political expedience, but they weren't quite MAGA enough. They had flashes of hesitation, of moral quandary, of pushback, right? And Donald Trump demands zealotous loyalty at all times, 100%. You can't blink, you can't waver, you can't hesitate. So kind of like Bill Cassidy got crushed in the Republican primary in Louisiana, Trump is trying to do the same thing to John Cornyn, and it may work. It may not. There's a runoff coming, but generally speaking, Donald Trump's endorsement helps immensely in any primary challenge, but it could also be a colossal failure in the general. We'll get to that. John Cornyn reacted on Tuesday to Donald Trump's endorsement of Ken Paxton. He says, I've worked closely with President Trump through both of his presidential terms and voted with him more than 99% of the time. He's constantly called me a friend in this race. It's now time for Texas Republican voters to decide if they want a strong nominee to help our GOP candidates down ballot and defeat Tallarico in November, or a weak nominee who jeopardizes everything we care about. I trust the Republican voters of Texas. In other words, John Cornyn, who, by the way, recently was so obsequious and so cowardly that he suggested that, or he actually proposed a bill that would rename a federal highway after Donald Trump. Like, that's how obsequious and bitch-made John Cornyn and Bill Cassidy and all these losers are, MAGA or otherwise, because they're so desperate to suckle at the political teat of their corrupt cult leader, Donald Trump. It still wasn't enough. So he disgraced and debased himself, much like Bill Cassidy, for absolutely nothing. Trump endorsing Paxton carries an extra sting, as Cornyn has long feuded with Paxton in public and very publicly courted Trump's endorsement, going so far last week as to announce a bill to name a highway in Texas after Trump. Disgusting. Many Senate Republicans quickly expressed their dismay at Trump's endorsement of Paxton, who's long been plagued by corruption and infidelity scandals. Much like Donald Trump, you fucking idiots. What has Paxton done, and who is Paxton if not Donald Trump in microcosm? He's a less popular, probably smarter Donald Trump. He is Donald Trump. You're shocked by this? You're dismayed by this? Your cult leader is Ken Paxton on a grander scale. This is your fault, you morons, you losers, you hypocrites. You should have crushed Trump when you had the chance. And instead, I can't believe this guy is so corrupt and he cheated on his wife. And Donald Trump did all those things. And you sacrificed your principle for political expediency for Trump. Why are you surprised Trump would do it for Paxton? And you all will probably do it for Paxton too. You're bitching now, but you'll probably do it for Paxton too. But let's see how people are reacting to this, and let's savor their fear and their anguish, because this is all their fault too. Again, Paxton sucks, Trump sucks, but Cornyn sucks, Cassidy sucks. All these Republican losers suck, MAGA or otherwise. Let's take a look. How does that help GOP senators slam Trump's endorsement of Ken Paxton, say it puts Texas Senate seat, quote, in jeopardy? Senate Republicans reacted with dismay to Donald Trump's endorsement of Ken Paxton's primary campaign against John Cornyn, openly expressing their fears it would make it harder and more expensive for Republicans to keep the seat. And actually, before we get into this, I want you to see this from Manu Raju on CNN because he was asked about this, and then we'll read a bit more.
There was a thought because that's what the president said he was going to do.
That's right.
He said, I'm going to endorse soon. I'm going to go to the Hill. Manu Raju is there for us. Manu, what are you hearing in the halls there, particularly from John Cornyn's colleagues who very much wanted him to be the person that President Trump endorsed?
Yeah, shockwaves, anger, disappointment, and real concern among Republicans in this building. They had been lobbying President Trump for months to get behind John Cornyn. Senate Majority Leader John Thune, to some of his top deputies like the number 2 Republican Senator John Barrasso had been speaking to President Trump for months, saying that they believe Cornyn was best positioned to win this race. He could save the party so much money in a critical race, and that ultimately they wanted him to get behind Cornyn early and fend up any primary challenge. And Trump continued to dilly-dally, not making a decision. His indecision on how to proceed ultimately led more candidates to jump into the race, not just Ken Paxton, but also Wesley Hunt in that first round, that primary round, that ultimately no one got 50% of the vote. And it led to that 2-person runoff that we're seeing that will take place on Tuesday between Cornyn and Paxton. And there was a real belief here in this building that Trump would stay out of this ultimately because he had not made a decision in so long. But now that he has gotten off the fence and backed Ken Paxton to be the next senator, a lot of Republicans are fearful that it will cost him a seat, a critical seat in keeping the majority, including Senator Thune, who just moments before Trump made this announcement was in the dark. He had no idea what Trump was going to do. He had been making that case to Trump privately to get behind John Cornyn even in the last several days. And he told our colleague Ted Barrett that he was still uncertain what would happen. And our colleagues caught up with Senator Lisa Murkowski, another Republican here, of course, someone who has been targeted by Trump over the years, expressing real concern that in her view, President Trump does not quite understand what it takes to keep the United States Senate. A real profound disappointment she expressed to reporters earlier. And I was talking to a bunch of Republicans today, too, Dana, many of them all on down saying, look, we need to get behind John Cornyn. He's the best person who can help us keep the Senate. But as you saw from that endorsement announcement just moments ago, Trump's still holding that personal grudge over Cornyn, even though Cornyn voted to acquit Trump in that second impeachment trial just because he offered some criticism of Trump post-January 6th. And just because he didn't quickly endorse him in the 2024 race, he did ultimately endorse Trump. He didn't back any other primary challenger. Still, those two things were on the president's mind. It is all about loyalty for President Trump, which is why he got behind Ken Paxton and why so many Republicans are angry about this president's decision here and worried that ultimately it will cost them so much money that they can spend in other battleground states to try to push Ken Paxton over the finish line, or in the worst case scenario, cost them a seat in trying to hold on to their very narrow majority down.
They're terrified. They're absolutely terrified. But let's hear it straight from some of them. Actually, let's see here. Even before the runoff this year, Texas Senate battle was already the most expensive Senate primary on record. Paxton found his name in negative headlines again this week over criticism for a plea deal his office had given to a man accused of sexually abusing a young boy. Disgusting. Reporters collected reactions from several Senate Republicans in the wake of the news. Punchbowl senior congressional reporter Alexandra Jessiah described Cornyn's colleagues as, quote, livid with Trump for picking Paxton, with Senator Roger Wicker, quote, stone-faced, Senator Susan Collins saying, quote, she doesn't understand why Trump endorsed the, quote, ethically challenged Paxton, and the normally taciturn John Thune was also, quote, stone-faced and throwing up his hands in apparent exasperation. Let's take a look. Senate Republicans are livid with Trump. Wicker remained stone-faced, appeared to be intentional for about 20 seconds as he walked into lunch and we asked him for his reaction. Senator Murkowski says Texas is all but lost to the Democrats now, one hopes. Susan Collins says she doesn't understand. Again, it's insane. Donald Trump is Ken Paxton. You idiots. You're either lying or you're stupid. What do you mean you don't understand? Thune tells me of Paxton endorsement, quote, it's his decision. Thune, like other Republican senators, was stone-faced. Thune also threw up his left hand as he said it. If you know John Thune, this counts as pretty deep anger. Murkowski says Trump endorsing Paxton, quote, puts that seat in jeopardy. Quote, how does that help strengthen the president's hand when we lose a state like Texas? Murkowski says she is, quote, supremely disappointed with Trump's endorsement of Paxton. Says, quote, maybe he thinks he can win with the strength of a Trump endorsement that Paxton can win. I think it puts that seat in jeopardy. Lindsey Graham says it will cost Republicans 3 times as much to push Paxton to victory in Texas over John Cornyn. Quote, I think Paxton can win. I think it'd be 3 times more expensive. I'll leave it up to the president to endorse who he likes. He's looking backward now, and he's looking at people that were there when he needed them the most. The Wall Street Journal has not weighed in on this yet, but they did kind of preemptively discuss this. So, for example, Trump's revenge campaign has already made the Senate harder to hold. He drove incumbent Tom Tillis into retirement in North Carolina, and Democrats have a strong candidate who is now the favorite, my former governor, Roy Cooper. Then there's also Trump's refusal to endorse John Cornyn in the Texas primary, despite pleas by Senate Majority Leader John Thune and campaign chairman Tim Scott, that opens the door to a possible primary win by Ken Paxton. Again, now we know that that's likely the case. This was written before. And who divides the GOP and could lose to Tallarico. Losing all of those seats would take the GOP down to 49 seats, barring another partisan change in other states. If Republicans lose the House, Trump's legislative agenda is effectively over. They lose the Senate, his ability to nominate conservative judges will be done. He will spend 2 years defending himself against nonstop Democratic investigations into his family, businesses, and so much more. So, man, your lips to God's ears. I hope you are correct. That is precisely what needs to happen. Republican commentator Eric Erickson's freaking out between Cassidy and Cornyn. Trump's agenda is going to be dead on arrival in the Senate now. And in Tillis, McConnell, etc., why would they bother a heavy lift for Trump? And again, it's all over the place. Trump Paxton. Republicans are panicking. Democrats are delighted. And hardcore MAGA is delighted as well because, again, MAGA really likes Paxton because he's the embodiment of everything MAGA is. Deluded, authoritarian, hella corrupt, right? So it's risky, but this puts Texas into play. And it's all because of Donald Trump. In the meantime, let me know what you think in the comments.